Give me a second.
Okay. All right. We are live with Politics After Dark. Welcome, welcome, everybody. With me, I have R.J. Harris from Oklahoma, who ran as a Liberty Democrat in 2014 for the governorship of Oklahoma. We're going to hear about how that went because he came from the Republican side. He's a Ron Paul guy. And I've also got Robin Koerner, who wrote a viral article back in 2011 urging Democrats to switch their registration to Republican just to vote for Ron Paul, just for a year. And it went viral, and I think a lot of Democrats took him up on that. So we're going to ask him about his thoughts on today and the current presidential race and how Rand is doing compared to his father. It's hard not to make comparisons. And then in a bit, we're going to have Avens O'Brien join us and give her thoughts to left liberty things as well. She's in that liberal mecca of Los Angeles, so she hangs out with a lot of people on the left, and so I feel like she's got a really strong feel for that side of things. So let me pull up the chat room. I'm going to make sure that my guests have access to the chat room so they can see what y'all are saying. From North Carolina, I say y'all. Do we need to log in for chat? No, you don't, guest Sachiko, but as you have seen, it assigns you a random, often humorous name that doesn't care about gender. So, guest Sachiko, introduce yourself. What is your real name in the chat room? And then we'll know who Sachiko really is. Your true identity. You get like a superhero alias. So, for Robin and RJ, I have just put in our private chat the page where Liberty.me live is. If you go to that link that I just posted in our chat room, you can see what our audience is chatting about and respond. It's always good to pay attention to chat because I love them. Charles Kennedy is here. Welcome, welcome again, Charles Kennedy. My favorite fan. Ken Johns-Un says you can edit your name if you like. I did not know that. Learn something new every day. Okay. So let's start with RJ, actually. RJ, I wanted to know what you thought about working with Democrats in your last campaign for Oklahoma governor. You ran as a Democrat, and you were previously a candidate on the Republican side. Talk a little bit about what it was like to make the switch and how things went for you.
Well, let me start off by saying that I can't see the chat because I'm on a mobile
Right.
device.
Yeah.
So if you see anything in chat that I need to respond to, please give me a shout out.
We will.
And I'll respond to it. And then as far as the switch, it's really kind of hard for me to think of it as a switch because I don't really change what I'm saying based off of the party that I'm in. So for me, it's really just changing my tie. You know, I got a blue and gold tie on today, you know, but I mean, I could put on a red one tomorrow or a black one or, you know, to me, it's just, you have to put on a tie to go to work. You have to check a block on a ballot to run for office, and really that's what it is. I don't everybody knows this about me. I don't have a lot of love for any political party. Mm-hmm. I want to run on the issues of liberty and small government and lots of personal freedom but I guess what you're kind of driving at is what did I see though in the Oklahoma Democratic Party, and
was there fertile soil for that message, if you will?
Right, and I was only in the race for a few months because it was more of an exploratory run, and a much more establishment candidate, a Democratic candidate, got in the race, although he was probably more conservative than the Republican candidate that was in the race, which is kind of funny when you consider, how those paradigms work. But here in Oklahoma, you have to be some stripe of conservative to be seriously considered, regardless of what your party is.
Yeah, it's very much the buckle of the Bible Belt.
But what I found is that the core of the Oklahoma Democratic Party, the activists within the party that really kind of drive it and set the agenda and the tone at the meetings and everything else that they do, it really just mirrors the national party, which is really leaning socialist right now, really taking a hard turn to the left, and so that will make it a little difficult for a candidate of my stripe to show up at a Democratic event, because even though the more mainstream Oklahoma Democrat is socially liberal and fiscally conservative, the activist Democrat that's showing up at the events is much more politically liberal, politically leaning towards socialism. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes it a little bit of a tougher crowd to talk to, because on the political spectrum they're going to be the polar opposite of a libertarian. So little bit of a bit of a wall to have to deal with, and a lot of explaining to do, and a lot of talking about what is a Liberty Democrat and so forth. And I had to really focus the issues. I didn't change my position on the issues, but I did focus what I was talking about to be on more social issues, so we can find some common ground. Especially,
that was one of my other questions, is if you don't change your message, how are they responding to discussions about economics? Do you have to nuance that a little bit for that audience? Uh-oh, we lost him. Well, that happens. In the meantime...
Is it musical chairs right now? Is that what that is?
Yeah, musical chairs.
But
Hi, Avens.
Hi.
I believe it or not, I really never got into the economics discussions in the Democratic circles all that much.
Really?
Because the events that I went to, just based, because a lot of times you go into an event and there's a theme for that event, there's a topic, or there's something trending in the news that's being discussed, and economics, just at the time that I was in the race from August till December, economics just didn't seem to really come up in any of my public appearances. It was much more a localized discussion. But even if it had I still would have continued to talk about liberty-based economics, and just done my best to win folks over on free market ideals. But what I wound up doing was, whenever I was speaking to Democratic crowds, I admitted at the very beginning of a discussion or a speech or anything, I said, look, there's gonna be ground where we differ. So let's talk about and especially since at the time the Oklahoma Democratic Party had no gubernatorial candidate late in the race. Okay, I said, you know what? Let's talk about the areas where we are able to come together. Marriage equality, ending the drug war, etc. And on those issues, we were seeing directly eye to eye.
Mm-hmm. Good. It's like half of our issues we resonate with Republicans, and half we resonate with Democrats, and it feels like on the Republican side we're constantly trying to explain and educate on things like the drug war and foreign policy, and it seems to me like just for a breath of fresh air, just to have people who get that. Mm-hmm. But then you got to explain economics when that comes up, and right. From your experience, they don't want to talk about it that much, which they just want free stuff.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. I've been struggling with that weird place that we're in politically for over a year now, 2 years now, trying to figure out where, if anywhere, within a quote party structure do I fit, and I can't find one. Because you're right, if you're in the Republican Party, you're trying to explain one type of freedom and liberty that they don't get. If you're in the Democrat Party, you're trying to explain the other side of it that they don't get. Libertarians seem to get it kind of from both directions. But unfortunately, in Oklahoma, despite a valiant effort to try to get us on the ballot, there is still, and a lot of people don't know this, there's still simply no such thing as a Libertarian Party here officially. So that's not even really an option. It's Republican, Democrat, or Independent. And speaking of independent, when it comes to the political race, I have to admit, while I am excited about Rand Paul's campaign, and that's nice to watch, I'm also really kind of excited to see that Jim Webb is talking about running as an independent. Again, I don't agree with him on everything, but in the Democratic field, he seemed to me like the one that was making the most sense, and then he dropped out. And so, but at least, I mean, he's being very serious about an independent campaign, and that'll be an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah. Robin, I have a question for you. Welcome to the show. The first question is, what are you drinking?
Tea.
Tea, very good.
Yeah. The gin and tonics don't happen until I'm done with work for the night. And it's only 20 to 7 over here, so I've still got a few hours left to do.
Well, that's after 5 o'clock.
Yeah, but see, I don't keep those normal hours.
So, my next question is, I want to ask you if you think Rand Paul is doing better or worse than his father at attracting people from the left.
Yeah, I'm going to say currently worse, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Expound. I want to know what you mean by that.
He is more consciously bringing his conservative base with him. He doesn't own the word and the label libertarian like Ron Paul does. He's not prepared to go so maverick as Ron Paul. And if you're a Republican going maverick, there is your appeal to the left, right? So the fact that Rand doesn't seem to be comfortable to doing that means that he's just not getting the same kind of attention from the left. Also, of course, the huge difference is now we have Bernie Sanders, who's actually doing quite a good job. And I noticed that I actually wrote an article. My last article was actually about this. We had Ron Paul filling these stadiums with tens of thousands of people 4 years ago. And now who's filling the stadiums? It's Sanders and it's Trump. Now, it should be Rand. The heir to those numbers is Ron Paul's heir Rand, right? But it doesn't seem to be going that way, and I've lots to say about why that is. But the Sanders, the fact that you have an insurgent, anti-establishment candidate who's competent, anti-establishment but competent on the left changes the picture.
You think Bernie Sanders is competent?
Yeah. Remember who he's talking to.
He's doing
it better.
If he's filling stadiums filled with people as a politician, that is competence by definition.
And the demographic of the people in the stadiums that he's filling is actually largely the demographic that Ron Paul was filling stadiums with. So that tells you something interesting.
Yeah, it says that if it's the same people, they really didn't get what Ron Paul was.
Well, it's probably not exactly
about.
the same people, but it's the same generation. It's the generation where the new energy comes from, right? Where the political, activism comes from. It's the generation that are going to have their hands on the levers of power for the next 2 generations. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah, but when Bernie Sanders opens his mouth and talks about economics, it is frightening to me. It is frightening how 1 + 1 equals a trillion in his mind somehow. Like people are falling for this. I think that
and that's our fault. That's our fault because we do not meet people on the left where they are, and where the politics of the left is the politics of good intention. And we don't frame our libertarian stroke conservative arguments when it comes to economics, starting with the felt experiences of people. We argue from capitalism to undoing poverty rather than from undoing poverty to capitalism. And that's why if Sanders is the guy calling those, let's in quotes, economic injustices, then he's the guy who the people will go to listen to the solutions to the perceived problems. We have to start framing the problems in the language of the people we want to appeal to. And obviously, Sanders coming from the left can do that easily for the left. He does that automatically. But we can do it too. That's what I think.
I think the perception is because we don't bemoan the problems as much as the left that we don't care. It's just that a lot of us have moved on to the solutions already, and we've left our audience behind, and they think that we're not acknowledging the problem, whereas, you know, we're already 2 steps ahead working on solutions. And that's not coming across.
Absolutely. And politics never works that way. You always have to meet people where they are. If you want to succeed, like Trump and Sanders are doing this, they're reflecting back to their bases what their bases already feel. They're not telling them what to think differently. They're telling them what they already feel. And that's what we're really bad at in the libertarian movement.
Yeah. Avens, welcome. I want to say a quick word to Avens and get her involved in the conversation. You have been stuck in traffic in LA, but now you're here with us. Sure. Thank you for making it. Have you poured yourself a drink yet?
I'm drinking sparkling water, but I am smoking a cannabis oil treat, so, you know.
Good for you.
I'm sufficiently altered for the experience of being on your show.
It does take that to be in the proper frame of mind to discuss politics.
Sometimes.
So, Avens, what are your thoughts? Do you have any thoughts on what they've been saying? I'm going to come up with a new question for you. You want to respond?
Well, no, I generally agree with what Robin was saying. I jumped in it was RJ, is that
RJ, yes.
Yeah, sorry. So I jumped in while he was talking, so I didn't get all of his points, but I agree largely with what Robin said, is that the libertarian movement is often very bad at meeting people where they are, and it's not that hard to do it. It's just whenever anytime a libertarian says, "Oh yeah, you know, like there is a problem in poverty," or like every time they acknowledge a leftist issue, the center of the libertarian base is like, "What, did you just become a Democrat? You're a statist," and it's reactionism within the libertarian movement when anyone
just for talking about problems,
like it's seriously like it's like. You can't do anything about a problem until you acknowledge it, and I do argue that libertarians did acknowledge these problems and are moving on to solutions, but you know you have to kind of like you can say, hey, look, I gotta cross the river, right? Like I made a boat, you should make a boat too, and they're like, I'm on the other side of the river and I don't know how to make a boat. Could you please help me? Like, and it's like we can get there. We can just be like, okay, let's row over to you, show you how to do it, and then let's go. But unfortunately, we're just kind of yelling at them from the other side of the ocean. But it's funny, actually. I've been wanting to write up a piece, and unfortunately it becomes one of those things in my head where I go, oh my God, there's so many different elements of this that I want to hit. But basically, I've been working on a piece for a while now that I want to title "Why Do Libertarians Hate the Poor?" and I want to just like make people click on it.
The poor so much.
Yeah, right, like and it basically just kind of goes through all of the things that we're perceived as being unfeeling on, and why we're actually trying to deal with these issues from the root. If we're radicals, then we're dealing at the root of the problem. And so the ideal is voluntary exchange, and that empowers individuals, and an individual is a minority is any minority that you're thinking of. So people be like, oh, but what about women in the workplace? It's like, yeah, we want to empower every single woman in the workplace just as much as every single man in the workplace, just as much as every single gay person. And it's all about finding, like, yes, I do agree with you. This is how we're doing that, and bring it back to how each of these people in an identity politic is an individual. But you have to get there. You have to bring them to you.
Okay, very good. Now, my next question is directed at whoever wants to jump in first. Does the left care about foreign policy and the violent wars that are going on anymore now that they're being prosecuted under a Democratic administration? Do they still care about peace? Has that issue just totally... Who wants to respond?
Well, I'll pick that up, and I'll join it to what Avens just said. She used the word identity. And nearly all politics are identity politics, whether you like it or not. And when we justify our political positions, we're doing just that. We're justifying. And we believe that we come to our political beliefs through logical justifications, rational justifications, but we don't. The process of justification is a completely different process in the brain from the process of judgment, which is how we come actually to be emotionally committed to one position or another. So the answer to your question directly is, of course, because this is human nature, how I feel about an issue is determined by how everybody else that I identify with, right, that identity politics, is behaving towards that issue. So it always changes with administrations. I mean, I give presentations and I actually give, percentages on like NSA, how the Democrats felt under NSA abuses under Bush versus Obama, and then you can look at the Republican numbers. And you always see this. Most of our political commitments are actually tribal, even though we don't believe they are, because we consciously justify them to ourselves using what we think is facts and logic. But that is never how we come to our positions. Now, and as libertarians, the libertarian movement has an unusually high, and this has been studied, proportion of low empathy, high analytic kind of folks. Now, that doesn't mean we're much more analytic when we come to our positions. We come to them also emotionally, even though we don't feel it that way. But when we approach everybody else with our logical argument, peppered with solid facts, we're just not making a sale. We're doing something else. We're trying to do justification rather than meet someone where they are, i.e. affirm their political identity, etc., etc. So there's a lot to this. The implication of your question is, if you like, derogatory for good reason. But all of us, and that includes us, this is human nature, make the same error. We all do it. And I've seen it in the libertarian movement as well.
Well, how do we break through that? I mean, how do...
Okay. So, I mean, I can go on a roll on this for hours. So I maybe should let other people answer before I answer that, because if I start, I might not stop.
Oh, this is Mike. This is my husband. He has to put up with me, so he gets to...
Hi, Mike.
Here you go. Anyone else want to talk about peace and foreign policy and where the anti-war left went?
I'm certainly not seeing it in the Democratic Party, because they've had their president in power for the last 7+ years, and it'll be 8 by the time it's all over, and we really didn't see a major change. We just saw, some different ingredients in the chili bowl, but we didn't really see any real change towards a anti-war effort from them. In fact, President Obama got us into another war in Libya, basically, doing in a different way exactly that which he got onto President Bush for in Iraq. I mean, wasn't the exact same way, but it was the exact same thing. Does that make sense? Invading and being in some way in being into another country, whether it was airplanes this time or boots or Tomahawk missiles or whatever it was. And I would just love to see a Rand Paul stand up and address the Benghazi Gate scandal that's going on today and being hashed out in the Congress and say, well, we shouldn't even have been there. I mean, nobody even brings up the fact that, okay, so all this stuff happened. Hillary Clinton, did she make mistakes? Did she do this and that? And I would just love to see Rand Paul jump in there and go, well, she shouldn't even had to make those decisions because we should have known better to be there in the first place because this president said he wasn't going to do that anymore. And then he did it. So
you think Rand Paul is pandering too much to the conservative base and then losing the libertarians in the process?
Well, here we go. Here we go. This is once again RJ being put on the spot like that for Rand Paul, and I have to say that I unfortunately think that he is. Okay, I think that he's tried that route and it hasn't worked for him. Right. He doesn't have the energetic masses of libertarians and young people and that coalition of the willing, if you will, that his father had, and it's in part because he's going along to get along too much with those establishment Republicans and not forcibly coming out and talking about a strong foreign policy achieved through non-interventionism and peace through strength of building our defense here at home and preserving that defense for use, in a constitutional defense of our life, liberty, or property. I don't see him making that strong, aggressive stance, and because of it, I think that's why his campaign is not getting the traction that we would have hoped to see from him.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with you. Avens, any thoughts?
So what's funny is when it comes to anti-war Democrats, I actually came from a libertarian perspective. Like, I was raised libertarian, and then I remember the first time that I actually identified, like, that I got to know people of like that called themselves Republicans or Democrats, and was like, oh, maybe I agree with you on some things, because I hadn't really like spent any time in the mainstream parties. And it was I was in college, and it was 2003, and it was when the Iraq War started, and I went to anti-war protests, and I was like checking antiwar.com all the time, and I was going to these anti-war protests, and everyone around me was a Democrat. Like, there were libertarians too, but like mostly it was Democrats, and Democrats saying this illegal war, this horrible thing, and I was so excited to be like, wow, wait, oh, you guys are great. I like Democrats. Democrats are excellent. I remember like the first time feeling like, oh, cool, like I'm on the same side as someone in a major party, and hey, maybe we can actually make real change with this, because there's so many other issues in which I don't have an ally on in either major party. And so I became really close with a number of Democrats in 2003, 2004, on until basically like 2007, Obama saying all the right things about war and about warrantless wiretapping and all this. And then I remember going like, wow, like, Obama gets it, and then he clearly didn't. But I remember as Obama's continued things, I have these same friends, these friends I made in 2003, 2004, where we're protesting Bush, and we're talking about how evil Bush is to put us in these wars, and to the Patriot Act and all of this. And so I'm still friends with these people, and we chat on Facebook, and I go like, how do you justify what Obama's done? Because Obama hasn't fixed things. Obama hasn't stepped up. Why are the Democrats now in lockstep behind military action? And it's all about that kind of justifying, like Robin was talking about. You start justifying what other people around you are saying, and they're all like, well, he couldn't do anything about it. This was all Bush's fault in the first place, and it's
still
so
Bush's fault.
It's so interesting, because they still kind of go like, oh, well, he had to put more troops in Iraq because it was Bush's fault. We shouldn't have been there in the first place. I'm like, well, you're right, we shouldn't have been there in the first place, but like the job of that leader who's anti-war should be to, if he is in fact anti-war, is to actually remove us from that situation that we shouldn't have been in the first place.
Yeah, what happened to Yes We Can?
Right. Exactly.
And it's just so unfortunate, because I see that kind of like, well, now that we have now that we have a good guy in office, of course that's how they look at it. It's now that we've got a good guy in office, there must be a reason we're still there. Like, there must be,
in other words, they just trust him.
Right. And it's so like, those are those moments when I'm like, but if McCain had won the election and this had happened, then you wouldn't feel that way. And you can't like spend too much time trying to logic it out, but it's sad.
But that shouldn't be news to anybody, right? You're right. But again, that's human nature, and indeed they put 30 Republicans and 30 Democrats in an fMRI brain scanner, and then had them listen to contradictions by Kerry and Bush, and they were looking at what parts of the brain actually light up, right, as they're trying to resolve what they're listening to. So the logical content of every statement was 2 + 2 = 5. It was a contradiction. But it's really interesting, obviously, that the Democrats let Kerry off the hook. This is back in 2004 or whatever. And the Republicans let Bush off the hook. And inside the scan, they're having to justify their take on what they're hearing, right? And so this is all being recorded. And it's fascinating, because the parts of the brain that actually light up in this process are, one of the big ones is that which handles moral authority. which is exactly what you're talking about there with Obama. Again, it is human nature. If Obama's saying it and you've already identified with him, again, identity politics, there's nothing insincere. That's going to be the natural thing that all of us are going to do. Just like if Ron Paul, I've seen this happen, if Ron Paul says something, we do it too. And that doesn't, I'm not saying anybody's better or worse, but I'm saying it's so easy to judge because you can always see the fault play out in those that you disagree with. But this is human nature. And so rather than kind of stand back and go, look, isn't this crazy? We need to engage this. We need to engage this even before we engage the finer points of the arguments. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, it's right on. And the other thing, by the way, that you see in that experiment is the part of the brain that handles conflict resolution. And when you actually can do get out of the cognitive dissonance by explaining away your guy's contradiction, you get a massive dopamine hit, and the reward and pleasure centers go like crazy. It's like taking a drug. So we're hardwired for this. The prefrontal cortex, by the way, which handles maths and logic, does nothing if you're in the field of politics. It just sits there latent. So you know, if you want to talk about arguing liberty to the left, I mean I get into a lot of things that you would expect me to get into when I'm giving presentations on this, but I take it right back to the empirical psychology and right down to the neurology, because unless you understand it, you're setting off in the wrong direction.
I think you just explained why you can't ever win an argument on the internet.
Yes, why do we do that? All those libertarians, I'm gonna change the world on Facebook. No, you're not. Go and have a whiskey or something. It'll do just as much good.
But you know, I have to tag on to something that Robin just said about that identity issue, that group identity, and it's not just wanting to go along with that group or that cognitive dissonance that you might suffer for not going along with the group. It's also and it was also really good the way you said we would do it too if Ron Paul said X or something. We also look and see what was the reaction of the group to those that did step out of line, like I did in 2010, and I did not go along with some of the foreign policy statements of Rand Paul, and I got cut off. I was like thrown out. I was like, oh, you're not allowed to do that. So anybody that saw that was like, oh, okay, well, we can't really step out of line even within our own liberty movement, or else we're trimmed out. You know what I'm saying? So it's not just your identity, who you associate with in that dissonance, but it's also seeing what happens to those people that don't toe the line.
But that, I would actually say, RJ, that is a corollary of the nature of identity politics. You know, that is actually as much a symptom.
Yeah, if you don't fall in line with the group, you get shunned.
Yeah, and I point this out to libertarians a lot, because you can without logical contradiction, you can be an orthodox Democrat or an orthodox Republican. You can't be an orthodox libertarian, right? Not without a logical contradiction. But there's an awful lot of orthodoxy in our movement, and it alienates those who might otherwise come in, because people just go, I don't want to be like that.
By orthodoxy, you mean like rigid ideology.
Yeah, kind of ideological commitment. So the idea that, you know, if you believe in these purported principles, they must play out in these positions on these specifics, on these specific policy areas. So even though we should all be about freedom of thought, and, you know, we celebrate the fact we celebrate the fact that we don't know what's best for other people, and we don't know how they do or should see the world. Sometimes we have a really hard time with people who interpret liberty differently. You know, we don't let people interpret freedom freely, and again, that alienates folks. You know, and I'm sure we've all seen that.
So I'm reading the chat room. I'm following along.
I'm totally in the chat room too. I just heard something about, hey, me, I saw my name.
Some good feedback. Does anybody have any questions for our panel? Anybody have any comments or questions? Well, I will let people type if they're typing. But one quick question, and this is directed at everybody. Short answers. 2 sentences. Republican side or Democrat side, which is more useful towards advancing liberty? Which is more useful to work with, in your opinion? Avens, we'll start with you.
A short answer for this?
Yeah.
The thing is that I think that people do themselves a disservice when they think that it has to be one or the other. I think that we really ruin our chances when we go like, oh, well, the Republicans are going to be our friends and we need to work with them, or the Democrats. Like in the same way that there's as many ways to live in the world as there are people in it, and in the same way that we may be uncomfortable with other people and what they do with their liberty, we have to embrace the fact that some libertarians are going to be better at dealing with the left on certain issues, and some are going to be better at dealing with the right. And like the idea that we can all go and like find the people that we can click with and reach out to and work with on whatever the issue is, whether it's drugs or economy or police state or whatever, I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we have to pick one, because that's what they want us to do. That's what the entire issue is that tribalism that comes from picking one or the other as our ally. Also, I find that the most convenient ally in those cases is always the one that's not in power, because they want us. Like, they want us when they're not in power. Like, that's why Democrats are great.
That doesn't seem useful.
No, but that's the thing, is that's when you basically can get them somewhat inclined towards your view. If that's why Democrats were great on anti-war stuff in '04, and it's one of the reasons that like every once in a while you can actually get them to have a conscience about it still. And it's why Republicans right now seem to be the good guys when it comes to like Rand Paul and this situation now, is that they're not in power, and so like they're actually willing to listen to our ideas, and that's when we have to go
once they get in power, you see how long that lasts.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is why I'm skeptical of Rand Paul. Like I like the guy personally, but I'm as skeptical of Rand Paul as I should have been about Obama in 2007. And I mean, as a hardcore libertarian who was like, maybe Obama could actually do something good. That was dumb of me, and now I feel similarly about Rand Paul.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was my long answer for your short answer question.
That was a good answer, though. I like that. Someone in the chat said it really depends on where you are. If you're in Oklahoma, maybe the GOP is the only practical way to go. Maybe in Seattle, you've got to be a Democrat. Or I don't know. RJ, what do you think?
I actually think that answer from that person in the chat, I don't know who it was, but they're actually on to something there, because my exact answer was going to be that it depends upon the market in which you find yourself, okay?
Yeah.
Here in Oklahoma, I actually don't think that the place to be is in the GOP, because the GOP is almost like a one-party system here, okay? And the side that needs us as candidates is the Democratic side. So here in Oklahoma, there's an opportunity to do in the Democratic Party what the Rand Paul Republicans wanted to do nationally with the Republican Party, which is, to take it over and actually use it as a vessel to get Liberty candidates elected here in Oklahoma. But there might be some other state where, the Republican Party is flat on its back and much easier to take over because it's ruled by Democrats. And I would say that's the state to be in the Republican Party. But when you're talking about if you want to talk about nationally, it's tough. It's a different answer, because I would have to say that with the absolute turmoil going on in the Democratic field of presidential candidates, that would be our best bet right now, is to have a Liberty candidate running in the Democratic Party. I tried to do some discussion with Gary Johnson about this, tried to convince him that, hey, maybe he ought to consider a run in the Democratic Party, but I think he's pretty much set on just, running in the Libertarian Party, and I respect that. But I tell you what, I mean, you can't help but look at those Benghazi hearings today and see what Hillary's going to be facing, an uphill battle for that. And then, of course, Joe Biden gets out of the race. That field is just dying for a Liberty candidate to be in there. So, and without that going to be the case, I'm really going to be keeping my eye on Rand Paul, obviously, on the Republican side. but I'm also keeping my eye on Jim Webb now because he's talking about running independent. I want to hear more from him. I know he's not going to strike all my chords on libertarianism, but I'd like to see how that goes. But you know, I think it's the short answer. Let me get back to the short answer. The short answer is it's where the opportunity is. If in your state the opportunity is to be in one party or the other to create some liberty candidates that actually get elected, then that's the party. And nationally, again, you need to look at where your opportunities are, and that's the one we should be able to get behind and move through.
Robin, do you have anything to add?
I agree with everything that's been said. I use the word opportunism a lot. Like, political success is about opportunism. It's about being responsive, working with these things. The way, being aware that people have tribal commitments, working with the politics of identity. And just as Avens and RJ both said, you need to do what's appropriate where you are, bearing all of that in mind. So yeah, and the important thing I guess I can add is that a lot of this, we think these are political battles, presidency, who's on the debate stage, whatever. But the political races themselves provide a platform to get a message into the culture. And ultimately, culture always precedes politics. So the reason Rand is important, even if he became president and sold out completely, if he's getting up and making conservatism, putting in that jar more things that are liberty stuff, right, then that moves that part of the culture that identifies conservative over time, because it normalizes ideas that might have been absent formerly. So so when we're thinking about being opportunistic in political races, we need to be aware that what we're really doing is using the race as a platform to speak to the culture. Culture always precedes politics.
Guest Maureen has an interesting comment. She or he says, the question is which party will mold themselves to be like us because they want our vote. We should not pick a party. The parties should pick us. I like the thought behind that, but so many times I feel like the redheaded stepchild. I feel like they don't want us.
This speaks to a point I've been making for years, actually, which is that Democratic and Republican registration and self-identification, here we are, identity politics, are in decline. Those identifying as independent or basically disaffected are on the rise. Now, in a two-party state, which is pretty much what we have, the guy who sits in the middle, the voter in the middle, has massively disproportionate control. So what we need to do is make independence, the political disaffection, be libertarian, be constitutionalist. We need to make the flavor of disaffection and independence libertarian. So in that way, we can have more power. Let's say we may have significant power more quickly if we could succeed in that than through the infiltrating, as it were, the two main parties. The middle is where you want to be in a two-party system.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. I like that perspective. Michael?
I'm all about winning. I just want to win.
You have a lot of fans in the chat room, and you haven't hardly said anything. Why don't you say something brilliant?
Go.
You probably don't want to hear my answer.
Well, yeah. I mean, Mike is the resident anarchist.
Yeah, I think that politics is a lot like global thermonuclear war. The only way to win is not to play the game. But
that would be true if the war had already
started. It sounds very nice to say that the people in the middle, the disaffected voters, are disproportionately powerful. Yet I look at, for example, the Congress, which has 535 members, if I remember correctly, and I think it has, what's it up to, 2 independents in there, and one of them's a crazy socialist. Not sure about the other. I understand the.
I think philosophically independent. I think there's probably a lot more that are philosophically independent that are declared independent officially.
And there's something.
My point is that you're absolutely correct that registration, self-identification amongst the masses as Republican or Democrat is in steep decline. And I think, as a matter of fact, the largest group, plurality, if I'm using the term correctly, is now the independents. The people that label themselves as independent outnumber the Republicans, and they outnumber the Democrats. They don't outnumber them together, of course. But what does that translate into in Democratic electoral results? It translates into a near universality of Republicans and Democrats holding office, because there's a whole level of institutional control in our supposed system of representation that ensures that regardless of how many people become disaffected and pissed off at Democrats and Republicans still keep getting elected. So
I agree with everything you've said there, Mike. The point I was making is that by showing those two, and everything you said was just right, entities, that we can make them lose unless they do this coherent thing that we demand. We don't stop the Congress being filled with just Republicans and just Democrats, unfortunately. But we begin to change what they do. It's a long process, but we begin to change what they. I mean, first of all, what they commit to. Well, we know that they don't like to keep commitments, but again, you have to keep at it. It's not something that can be done overnight. But culture leads political commitments, leads political action, and it will still have two flavors: red and blue, donkey, elephant. You're right about that.
You know, there's something though that I wanted to add, and wanted to go on the record here with, because there's been a lot of talk tonight about, left or right, Republican or Democrat, where we're going to fit in, where we're going to find the opportunities. And I know there's some people watching this who are planning on voting Libertarian or voting for Gary Johnson if he runs in the Libertarian Party, and they're going, RJ, you ran for president in our party in 2012. How come you're not just telling people to eschew those two parties the way you did in 2012? And I did. I made a very passionate defense and argument for why the Libertarians can win. To just be true to, and I still believe that, but it can't always be about strategy. You've got to have some workable tactics at some point, and I have argued very strenuously, and I don't really feel like I've gotten anywhere with it, and that is that the Libertarian Party needs to step up and become active in those states where the Republicans and Democrats are running their primaries at the same time. Okay, so right now, all these Democrats and Republicans are focusing their time and money in Iowa, New Hampshire. They're going to be running around the states, spending money, going to speeches, talking to people. And where's the Libertarian Party? It's nowhere. They're not going. What's going on in the Libertarian Party is not happening in Iowa and in New Hampshire at the same time the other two parties are going on. So there really isn't a third choice in the primary process. But if there was, that would be a game changer. If right now there were Libertarian activities and primary preparations going on in Iowa, and Libertarian candidates crisscrossing Iowa the way they are in the other two parties, some of the media would start to pick that up, and they'd say, okay, now there's a serious third party that's engaging in the process that the other parties are engaging in around the country.
I think that would take quite a bit of a ground game that I'm not sure the Libertarian Party really can accomplish at this point. There is a lot of noise, a lot of political noise going on in those states, and like the political advertising is expensive through the roof.
Oh yeah.
I don't know.
So
I mean, that's a great strategy. It's a great idea. I just don't know if the ground game really, if the infrastructure really exists.
Yeah, I mean, if you had the same number of willing drones that the Democrats and Republicans have, and the giant bags of cash that the Democrats and Republicans have to blitz the public with campaign ads and slick production values and canvassing neighborhoods and pressing the flesh. But let's be honest, Libertarians don't. When the Libertarian Party of North Carolina get together and have their their annual big meeting for all of North Carolina, I'm pretty sure have fewer people in attendance than the young Republicans of Raleigh, North Carolina do every Tuesday night when they get together for beer.
But see, this is a decision.
Small party.
Yeah.
But this is a decision, though, that can be made by the national party about the timing of when their primaries are going to occur and the sending of those candidates into those fields at that time. And not only that, but we've seen campaigns like the Paul campaign, like my campaign, that was able to generate way more attention and traction than the money reflected that we ought to have been able to generate. And how do we do that? With the energy of our base, the energy of our activists, the online campaigning, the Facebook and the social networking and so forth. If even that was going on in Iowa at the same time that the other races are going on, that at least puts you into the matriculation where you can create some opportunities. But if you're not even there, if you're not even part of the process when the rest of it's going on, you're not part of the discussion. And so until the Libertarian Party steps up and wants to compete in those early states at the same time those other two, we'll just continue to be looked at like we're not a real serious option.
Well, we should probably leave it there because I have kept everybody, again, much later than I intended to. So thank you all for your participation.
This has been great.
But I feel like I need to stick to my word and keep it to 45 minutes, and it's already longer than that. But anyway, thank you all very much.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to leave it there. All right.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.